The last thing I saw before I died was a video of my family celebrating my sister's engagement. I was 28 years old, lying in a hospice bed in a facility 3,000 miles from the only home I had ever known, and my lungs were filling with fluid I could no longer cough out. The nurse had propped my phone against the water pitcher so I could watch the live stream. My sister Sabine, the real daughter, the one my parents had found when I was 10, was standing in the center of the Ashford Estate ballroom, her hand outstretched, a diamond glittering on her ring finger. My mother was crying with J-O-Y, and my father was beaming, and my brother Julian was giving a toast, and I was dying alone in a room that smelled of antiseptic and forgotten flowers. They had sent me away when I was 16 after 6 years of living in the attic. After 6 years of being told I was the fake daughter, the imposter, the burden they had to bear until Sabine was comfortable enough to take my place. After 6 years of meals eaten alone, of clothes that were Sabine's cast-offs, of birthdays that were celebrated for her while I was told to stay in my room and not embarrass the family. After 6 years of being erased so thoroughly that when I finally collapsed at school, malnutrition, the doctor said, and chronic stress, and a heart that was breaking under the weight of so much cruelty, no one knew who I was. The Ashford's ward. The headmaster called me the charity case. Even he had forgotten I was ever their daughter. The video ended, the screen went dark, and I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, and my last thought was a prayer. Asterisk, please, let someone remember me. Let someone know what they did. Let someone make them pay. Asterisk. And then I opened my eyes, and I was 10 years old again. The ceiling above me was the pale pink of my childhood bedroom. The one with the hand-painted butterflies my mother had commissioned when I was born, telling everyone who visited that her daughter was going to be extraordinary. The one that had been painted over in sterile white the week after Sabine arrived, because Sabine preferred neutral tones. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, my hands small, 10-year-old hands, soft and unblemished, clutching the quilt my grandmother had sewn for me before she died. The quilt that Sabine would later cut into cleaning rags because she didn't like the pattern. System initializing. Host detected, Elena Ashford. Status, deceased. Cause, systemic neglect, malnutrition, chronic stress-induced cardiac failure. Compatibility, 99.9%. Activating karmic rebirth protocol. You have been wronged beyond mortal measure. You are granted one chance to return. Use it to expose what was hidden. Skill unlocked. Documentary evidence. Every act of cruelty committed against you in your previous life has been recorded and stored in this system's database. You may access any piece of evidence at any time. Dates, times, witnesses, and documentation are preserved with forensic accuracy. I sat very still in my childhood bed, the morning light filtering through the curtains, and I understood I had been given a weapon, not money, not power, evidence. The one thing my family could not buy, bury, or erase. Every slap, every insult, every meal I was denied, every birthday that was celebrated for Sabine while I was locked in my room, all of it was stored in the system, time-stamped and verifiable. I was 10 years old. Sabine had been living with us for 3 months. The slow, systematic destruction of my life had already begun. The first whispers of our real daughter. The first time my mother had looked at me with something other than love. But it wasn't too late, not yet. I swung my legs out of bed and walked downstairs. My family was in the dining room, gathered around the mahogany table that had been in our family for 6 generations. My father was reading the newspaper, and my mother was pouring tea. Julian was scrolling through his phone. And Sabine was sitting in my chair, the one at my mother's right hand, eating from my favorite bowl, the one with the hand-painted roses that my grandmother had given me on my 7th birthday. Good morning, Elena, my mother said, her voice careful in the way it had become since Sabine arrived. There's oatmeal on the sideboard. You can eat in the kitchen. The kitchen, not the dining room, not with the family. I was being exiled already, 3 months in, and I hadn't even noticed. No, I said. My mother's teacup paused halfway to her lips. Excuse me? No, thank you. I'll eat here, in my seat. The one Sabine is sitting in. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. Sabine looked up from her oatmeal, her eyes wide with practiced innocence. Julian lowered his phone. My father folded his newspaper. Elena, my father said, his voice low and warning. Don't start. Sabine is still adjusting. We've discussed this. We haven't discussed anything. You told me Sabine was my new sister, and I needed to be nice. But being nice doesn't mean giving her my chair, my bowl, my room, and my parents. Being nice doesn't mean disappearing so you can pretend I never existed. My mother's face flushed. That is not. We are not pretending you never existed. We are making space for your sister. She has been through so much. Her adoptive mother died, and she's alone in the world. She's not alone. She has you. Both of you. Julian. Grandmother. The entire family is rallied around her. But who is rallying around me? You don't need rallying. You've had us your entire life. Had you. I repeated. Past tense. Because now Sabine has you, and there's nothing left for me. Sabine's lower lip trembled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I can eat in the kitchen. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, sweetheart. My mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around Sabine's shoulders. Elena is just having a moment. She'll adjust. I looked at my mother, her arms around a stranger, her eyes avoiding mine. In my previous life, I had retreated. I had eaten in the kitchen. I had adjusted. I had spent the next 6 years adjusting until there was nothing left of me to adjust. This time, I walked to the table. I picked up my bowl with the hand-painted roses, and I carried it to the kitchen. But before I left the room, I stopped and turned back. One day, I said, my voice calm and clear, "You're going to realize what you did, and I won't be here to forgive you." My mother didn't respond, and my father had already reopened his newspaper. Julian had gone back to his phone. Sabine was watching me with an expression that was too knowing for a 10-year-old, too cold. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had known from the first day. I walked into the kitchen and closed the door behind me, and then I activated the system for the first time. The translucent blue interface materialized in front of my eyes, and I spoke a single command: document everything. The system responded with a soft chime. Asterisk, asterisk, evidence file number 0001 created. Subject, verbal and emotional displacement by primary caregivers. Witnesses, Richard Ashford, Celeste Ashford, Julian Ashford, Sabine Moreau. Timestamp, September 15th, 8:47 a.m. Status, logged. I smiled for the first time since my rebirth. The evidence was already building, and this was only breakfast on the first day. The abuse escalated exactly as it had in my previous life, and my parents didn't hit me. Physical violence would have left marks, and marks could be photographed, documented, used against them. Instead, they erased me with 1,000 small cruelties, each one invisible on its own. Devastating in aggregate, I was excluded from family dinners, and white clothes were replaced with Sabine's cast-offs. My birthday was forgotten while Sabine's half-birthday was celebrated with cake and presents. My school achievements were ignored while Sabine's mediocre grades were praised as remarkable progress for a child who has been through so much. And every single incident I recorded, every cruel word, every denied meal, every time my mother looked at me with a cold, distant expression she had never worn before Sabine arrived. Every time my father introduced me as our other daughter, not Elena, not his firstborn, just the other one. Every time Julian, my older brother who had once promised to protect me, walked past me as if I were a ghost. The system logged everything WY my 12th birthday. I had amassed over 2,000 pieces of evidence WY my 14th birthday. The number had grown to 5,000. By my 16th birthday, the day my parents planned to send me away to a therapeutic boarding school that was actually a facility for unwanted children, the database contained 7,342 timestamped, verified instances of abuse. And the final piece of evidence was the most damning of all. 3 days before I was scheduled to leave, my father called me into his study, and my mother was there, Sabine was there, Julian was there. They were all seated in a semicircle, like a tribunal preparing to pass judgment. "Elena," my father said, his voice heavy with rehearsed gravity, "your mother and I have made a decision. We believe it's best for everyone if you finish your education at the Sterling Academy in Montana. It's a boarding school, a good one, you'll be well cared for." "The Sterling Academy," I repeated. "That's not a school. It's a residential treatment center for troubled youth. It's where parents send children they don't want anymore." My father's jaw tightened. "That's not. You're being dramatic." "I'm being accurate, and I looked it up. The Sterling Academy has a 30% graduation rate. 0.40% of its students require psychiatric hospitalization within 5 years. 2 former students have sued the facility for abuse. You're not sending me to school. You're sending me away so you can forget I exist." Sabine sniffled. "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here, Elena wouldn't be so unhappy. Maybe I should leave instead." "No." My mother's voice was sharp. "You are not leaving. You are our daughter. We love you." "And what am I?" I asked quietly. "What am I to you?" Silence. My father looked at his desk. My mother looked at Sabine. Julian looked at his phone. No one answered. "I see," I said. "Well, I have something to say before I go." I pulled out a flash drive, the one I had prepared with the system's help, containing all 7,342 pieces of evidence. But before I could speak, my mother raised her hand. "We don't want to hear it, Elena. Your accusations, your paranoia, we've heard it all before. You're a difficult child. You've always been difficult. That's why we're sending you away. Not because we don't love you, because you need help we can't provide." "You're right," I said. "You can't provide the help I need, because the help I need is for someone to believe me, and none of you ever have." I set the flash drive on my father's desk. "This contains evidence of every single thing you've done to me for the past 6 years, every meal I was denied, every birthday that was forgotten. Every time you introduced Sabine as your only daughter while I stood 2 feet away, every time Julian told his friends I was the fake sister. Every time Mother told me I should be grateful you let me stay in this house at all." My father's face had gone pale. My mother's mouth was open. Sabine was staring at the flash drive as if it were a live grenade. "I'm not going to the Sterling Academy," I continued. "I've already called my grandmother's lawyer, the one you fired 3 years ago because he asked too many questions about how you were treating me. He's been waiting for my call. He has copies of everything on this drive. And tomorrow morning, he's filing a petition for emancipation and a civil suit against both of you for emotional abuse, neglect, and intentional infliction of distress." "You can't do this," my mother whispered. "We're your parents." "You stopped being my parents the day you decided Sabine was your only child. I was your daughter for 10 years before she arrived. 10 years of being loved, of being seen, of being told I mattered. And then she walked through the door, and you threw me away like garbage. You don't get to call yourselves my parents anymore. You forfeited that right." I walked toward the door, and my father stood up, his face red with fury. If you walk out that door, you are no longer an Ashford. You'll have no family, and oh inheritance, and oh legacy. You'll be nothing. I stopped, I turned, and I looked at him. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me bedtime stories, who had told me I was his greatest joy. And I felt something inside me finally, completely, irrevocably break free. I've been nothing to you for 6 years, I said. Now I'm going to be something to myself. I walked out. The door closed behind me, and I didn't look back. Third-party objective commentary by Dr. Helena Mirren, forensic child psychologist, author of The Architecture of Family Betrayal. What strikes me most about the Ashford case is the extraordinary forensic discipline the victim demonstrated. The human memory is fallible, prone to gaps and distortions, particularly under sustained emotional duress. Yet Elena Ashford, a child, let us remember, between the ages of 10 and 16, documented her abuse with a thoroughness that would shame most professional investigators, dates, times. Specific words spoken, witnesses present, the emotional context surrounding each incident. This is not merely impressive, it is diagnostically significant. Children subjected to prolonged emotional abuse typically develop coping mechanisms that distort their perception of reality, gaslighting themselves, minimizing their own suffering, rationalizing their abuser's behavior. Elena did the opposite. She became the most reliable narrator of her own trauma. She refused to forget, refused to forgive, refused to let the passage of time erode the sharp edges of what was done to her. The flash drive scene is particularly instructive. The father's threat, you will have no family, no inheritance, no legacy, reveals the core transactional logic of the Ashford family's conception of parenthood. Love in the Ashford household was never unconditional. IT was a contract, and the terms of the contract were determined entirely by the parents. The biological daughter, Sabine, did not earn their love through merit or character. She simply existed as the real child, and that was sufficient. Elena, the fake daughter, could never earn it because the contract had been voided the moment a more authentic claimant appeared. What makes Elena's response so powerful is its refusal to engage with the father's premise. He offers a choice: submission or exile. She rejects the choice itself, along with the entire framework that produced it. I've been nothing to you for 6 years. Now I'm going to be something to myself. This is not a declaration of independence. IT is a declaration of self-creation. She is not merely leaving her family. She is ceasing to define herself through their eyes. The most chilling detail of the entire narrative is the family silence when Elena asks, "What am I to you?" No one answers, not the mother, not the father, not the brother. Not even Sabine, who knows, on some level, that her position depends on Elena's erasure. The silence is the answer. And that silence, more than any blow or insult, is what condemns them. The emancipation hearing was held in a family court in Manhattan, and it was the first time in 6 years that my family was forced to look at me and see me. My grandmother's lawyer, Marcus Sterling, a silver-haired pit bull of an attorney who had been waiting for this day, presented the evidence in chronological order, each exhibit a brick in the wall of my family's cruelty. The forgotten birthdays, the denied meals, the report cards that were never opened, the photographs of Sabine displayed throughout the house while my picture was removed from every frame. The testimony of teachers who had noticed my decline, but had been told by my parents that I was going through a difficult phase. The testimony of the household staff who had been forbidden from speaking to me on penalty of dismissal. And then there was the piece de resistance, the Sterling Academy. Not a school at all, but a facility for troubled youth, with a documented history of abuse, neglect, and regulatory violations. Marcus presented brochures, intake forms, and a letter from my father to the director promising a generous donation if the facility could straighten out my difficult child. The letter was dated 2 months before I was scheduled to arrive, and my parents had been planning my exile for months. My mother wept through the entire hearing, but her tears were for herself, for the humiliation, for the public exposure, for the collapse of the perfect family image she had so carefully cultivated. My father sat rigid and silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the wall behind the judge. Julian didn't attend. Sabine was there, pale and trembling, her hand clutching my mother's arm. She still thought she was the victim. She still thought I was the villain. The judge granted the emancipation petition in less than an hour. She also referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. And she awarded me a settlement for my parents' assets, enough to pay for college, graduate school, and the first years of a life they had tried to deny me. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Manhattan sunlight, and I felt, for the first time in 6 years, like I could breathe, and why Aunt Margaret was waiting for me on the steps. She had flown in from San Francisco the night before, and she had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching. She was 73 years old, a retired federal judge, and the only member of my family who had never stopped believing me. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," she said. "My grandmother was the only one who ever saw me," I replied. "I wish she were here." "She is. She's been here the whole time. She just had to wait for you to see herself." I hugged her, and I cried, and for the first time in 6 years, the tears were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief. I was free. 20 years later, I stand on the stage of the New York Public Library, accepting the National Book Award for my memoir, The Forgotten Daughter. The book has spent 104 weeks on the bestseller list. IT has been translated into 42 languages. It has been taught in universities and cited in courtrooms and read by millions of people who saw themselves in my story. The girl who was told she was nothing has become the voice of everyone who was ever silenced. My family attended the sentencing hearing, not in person, but through the media coverage that followed them everywhere. My father, Richard Ashford, had died 5 years earlier, his heart giving out under the weight of the shame he had carried since the trial. My mother, Celeste, lived in a small apartment in Florida, estranged from Sabine, abandoned by Julian, her social circle reduced to a handful of women who didn't know her history. Julian had moved to another state and changed his name. Sabine, the real daughter, who had been given everything, had squandered her inheritance on bad investments and worse relationships. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, telling anyone who would listen about the sister who had ruined her life. I don't think about them often. They're footnotes in my story, minor characters who exited the stage long ago. The people I think about are the ones who saved me. My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, who saw the truth before anyone else, and my Aunt Margaret, who never stopped fighting for me. Marcus Sterling, the lawyer who believed me when no one else would. And the woman I have become, the woman who was forged in the fire of my family's cruelty and emerged, not broken, but unbreakable. The daughter they erased became the woman who wrote her own story. And she never, ever let anyone write it for her again.